For the longest time, people have talked about using car keys as a weapon, and they have done it in the most absolute wrong way. And people that don't know any better, they end up falling for this, and it's not really a good thing. One of the most popular arguments that I hear against any type of weapons-based system is, I'm not going to carry these weapons around with me. Why would I want to learn all these things? And in truth, I could kind of see the argument slightly. However, if you dive a little bit deeper, you can find a lot of benefit from training these types of things. Today, we're going to be touching on the use of improvised weapons. I love improvised weapons, and I think they really hold a good place when it comes to your self-defense training. We're also going to talk about a few of the arguments that people have against weapons-based training. And we're also going to try to find the connections of different things that you can train that will give you this skill set, even if you're not really training for the weapon. So what makes me an expert when it comes to weapons training? Well, I'm not an expert. I'm a student, just like you. But I'm also been doing this long enough to where I can teach these things to other people. So I've been training martial arts for over 30 years, and I've spent the last 15 years in arts such as Jeet Kune Do, Filipino Martial Arts, and really primarily pekiti-tirsia. So before we go any farther, I want to thank you for being here. I know that you can watch any kind of martial art video that you can possibly imagine here on YouTube, and yet you're watching my video. So from me to you, I really want to say thank you. Now, before we move any farther ahead, I do want to make a specific distinction. What you have in the martial arts industry is you have systems that focus primarily on the weapon, primarily on the blade. You also have systems that focus primarily on the empty-handed aspects. And then you have some systems that kind of mix in between both weapons and empty hands. The reason why this distinction is important is because there are a lot of people that talk about the weapons-based systems with just a little bit of disdain, because their point is that, well, I'm not going to have a big knife with me when I'm out on the street, or even more so, I'm not going to have my Kali stick when I'm walking to my car. And up to and including, I'm not going to have a sword with me everywhere I go. So why would I learn these things? And the answer is simple. The reason why this answer is simple is because with these weapons-based systems, it's not necessarily the weapon that you're using that's important. It's how you're using it. And we're going to talk about that today.
How about a magic trick? I'm going to make this pencil disappear.
Now, the distinction with the empty-handed systems, and we're going to kind of go into this a little bit more in depth as the video goes on, but just because all I primarily do is throw punches and kicks and so forth, that doesn't mean that I can't put something in my hand using the same movements and still be able to utilize that weapon. So before we get into the ins and outs of how and why and so forth, I do want to highlight a few improvised weapons just to kind of keep it fresh on your mind. Now, obviously you have the weapons that the systems are really intended for. You have your Kali stick, you have your sword, and you have your knife. And you can add more sticks, you can add more swords, you can add more knives, and then you kind of get the gist of what's inside of that system. Now, when it comes to improvised weapons, what we're talking about is we're talking about things that aren't necessarily meant to be a weapon. With a little bit of creativity and a little bit of skill, you can turn really anything you have into a good weapon. You have sticks. You have long sticks that are kind of thick, and I went outside and tested this before I brought it in for the video. It's not going to break unless I hit somebody really hard, which nobody's going to let me do that today. You also have shorter sticks that you can use as more like you would use a knife. You have flashlights. You have carabiners. This one's been altered a little bit to make it a little bit more weapons-based. Don't tell anybody. You have pins. You have your actual tactical pin, which that's kind of what the use is for. So improvised, yeah, kind of, but it's still meant to be a weapon. But then you have regular pins. And regular pins are great. If you've ever watched the movie, the first Jason Bourne, The Bourne Identity, you can see how useful a pin can be. I'm joking. The chances of you fighting an assassin and being able to stab him in the hand with a pin is probably pretty slim, but it's still cool to watch. You also have things like necklaces. If you know what you're doing, you can utilize any type of like hard metal type necklace to be able to use as a weapon. You have bottles, you have belts, you have everybody's favorite and often the most misunderstood keys. you have towels, you have magazines, you have your phone, you have anything that you put into your hands. If you have the knowledge and the skill, can be used as an improvised weapon. Now, why is it that I feel like improvised weapons are so important? Why are we even shooting this video? Outside of this being a passion of mine, and this is one of the things that I really love training, when it comes to a violent encounter, we're not necessarily putting ourselves in a position to try to fight a fair fight. And what I mean by that is if you're having to fight for your life, if your life and your health, your overall health is on the line, I don't want to negate anything that I might have in my arsenal for the sake of fighting fair. If I can use a flashlight, if I can use a cool little ring to jab into somebody's eye, if I could use a stick or any type of improvised weapon to help my chances of success, of going home to my wife and my kids, of being able to live my life in the physical health that I am now, I want to use everything at my disposal. So one of the first things that I want to talk about when it comes to improvised weapons is how are we going to hold them? Especially if you're not used to training a weapons-based system, and maybe this is something that you've never come in contact with. How you hold your weapon is going to dictate your tactics going forward. Now, I'm going to use a flashlight just for this example because I carry a flashlight with me everywhere I go. You have three main ways of which you can hold these weapons. You can hold it with a reverse grip where the bulk of the weapon is coming out of the bottom of your hand. You can hold it in a forward grip where the bulk of the weapon is coming out of the top of your hand. And then you have the middle grip where the weapon is on both the bottom and top of my head. Now, again, depending on how you're holding your weapon, it's going to dictate the type of tactics you're going to use. If you're using a longer type weapon, you can go with the forward grip. You can even kind of go with the middle grip depending on what it is that you're trying to pull off. Depending on the situation, I wouldn't necessarily go for the reverse grip. However, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It's just not something that I would choose personally. The next thing that I want to talk about when it comes to improvised weapons is how do you get to the point where you can utilize them? Now, again, improvised weapons, we're thinking about things that we're carrying with us or things that we happen to find wherever it is that we're at. I carry the flashlight with me everywhere I go, and most of the time I'll carry it in my front pocket. Sometimes I carry it in one of my cargo pockets. What you want to be able to do is if you're going to be using this as an improvised weapon, you really want to be able to get your hands on it whenever it's time to go. You want to be able to do this under pressure, and you also want to do this under stress. So whenever you're playing with your improvised weapons or you're training your improvised weapons, one of the first things that you should probably do on every rep that you can is practice on how to draw these things. If you're going to utilize something like keys, for example, and you're in a situation where you're walking from the car to the store or whatever, and the weapon is already in your hands, that is absolutely amazing. You don't have to work on the drawing aspect. However, it's still something that you want to keep in mind. For your other types of improvised weapons like sticks or magazines or something like that, something that's usually laying off of your person, you want to, when you're training these things, you want to play around with being able to get to that object and then being able to pick it up and utilize it. And what I mean is I don't always want to take my attention off of what's going on to be able to go down and get a stick. Obviously, you don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage. However, if you are training these things, or even if you have to utilize it in real life, if there just so happens to be a stick around, then you want to be able to pick that up and immediately start putting it to work without a whole lot of lag time to where your aggressor can possibly take you over. Now, when it comes to certain things like magazines, for example, obviously I'm not going to be able to do much with this. It's not going to cause any damage. I could possibly use it as a distraction, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But in order to utilize this as a weapon, I might have to do something like roll it up to where now I can have it in that forward grip and I can use it however I see fit. Again, when it comes to training weapons, you want to do exactly that. You want to be able to train with what it is that you will have the hopes of using in a real-time engagement, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to pull this stuff off and utilize something like this to save your life. So the next thing that I want to talk about when it comes to improvised weapons is systems. Now, it's not within the premise of this video to tell you that you should be training a certain system, or that your system is insufficient, or that this is better, or any of that kind of stuff. Really, what I'm trying to tell you is that what you're already training, if you're already training something, chances are you're already building up the skill to be able to utilize these weapons if you need to. Some systems that you train may even put an emphasis or make it mandated that you train a certain type of weapon to reach a certain kind of rank. I remember back when I was much younger and I was going through the process to get my Tae Kwon Do black belt, we had to train a certain weapon to be able to progress to the black belt ranks, and we had to give a whole report on the history of the weapon and why it was used and so on and so forth. My weapon of choice was the size, and just to kind of tell you how much of a nerd I am, the only reason why I chose the size is because Raphael was my favorite Ninja Turtle. And I mean, what better way to pay tribute? I can also remember back shortly after I got my Tae Kwon Do black belt that I was going for my karate black belt. And where I trained, when you were going through the process to get your black belt, you had to learn the sword, the samurai sword. And man, did I feel like a samurai. However, working with this weapon wasn't really what the system was based off of, but it did kind of set the foundation for me for understanding the use of weapons, and ultimately it kind of helped lead me into more weapons-based systems. And it's actually kind of funny. So I got to learn the size and feel like Raphael, and then I got to learn the katana sword and feel like Leonardo. So I guess what I need to start working on is the staff and the nunchucks, and then I'll have the whole collection. All right, so back to the points of the systems. Now, you do have weapon-specific systems. Filipino Martial Arts is great for that, and there are some others, but I use that because that's where a lot of my knowledge base comes from. When it comes to Filipino Martial Arts, the whole idea behind it is that it is a bladed system, and everything that you do with a blade, whether it's single, double, longsword, or single or double knife, or even the empty hands aspect, is all based on how you move with the blade. So when I'm here and say I have my kali stick and I'm going to do these angles, right? The same angle I would use for the improvised weapon, whether it's a stick or something a little bit longer. It could even be a bottle, right? I would still use the angulated type attacks. Now, there are thrusts and there are horizontal type attacks as well. And again, the idea behind it is that everything that you do with the stick, you would do with the sword, and you would also do with the improvised weapons. Now, with the long weapon, what we're talking about here is the forward grip. There is a little bit of an emphasis on the reverse grip. However, again, in my experience, it's not as practical with the long weapon. Where the reverse grip comes in is when you're using a knife. When I'm using a knife, I can still use the same type of tactics, whether it's angulated, whether it's thrusting, or whatever, that I do with the forward grip. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because that plays a part in improvised weapons as well. If I'm using a pin, so to speak, I can use that in the reverse grip, and I can still use the same angles, or I can still use the same thrusting. It really just depends on what you're used to training and how you're used to moving. Now, other systems have their specific strategies and tactics as well. Something that's used for a little bit more in-close type fighting, or fighting from a disadvantage, like Defense Lab or Keysi Fighting Method. These have their own ways of moving. You move from the shapes, and you move from, again, being at a point of disadvantage. Now, one of the things that they did with this system that I thought was pretty intelligent is that every shape that you have, every position that you have, can be utilized with a weapon in your hand. So if I'm going to that shape 1, I can do that shape 1, protecting my head. On the same time, I'm still wielding that weapon. Now, what the shapes do is they put your hands in a particular type of angle. And when I'm here, there's only so many ways that my hands can move out of this. When my top hand is coming out, it's coming out at that diagonal, right? So if I'm using an improvised weapon and I have that reverse grip, right, I can still be able to fully utilize that weapon while protecting my head based on this type of system. So we've talked about Filipino Martial Arts, and we've talked about Defense Lab and Keysi Fighting Method, but what if you don't train these things? whether it's lack of interest or whether it's you don't have the availability around you to be able to train that. That doesn't mean that you're not suited for the use of improvised weapons at all. One of the other systems that I train in and that I have a lot of experience in is Jeet Kune Do. And Jeet Kune Do, on the outside looking in, is very much an empty-handed system. However, one of the lessons that I learned through this, and one of the lessons that I've learned from a couple of other people that are kind of in this same type of world, is that just because we're training the jabs, the crosses, the hooks, overhands, uppercuts, whatever, doesn't mean that I'm not training the same specific skills that I could with a weapon. And really what this is a mind game. You have to get out of your own way. Yeah, I'm a boxer, jab, cross, hook. I'm a JKD guy, again, jab, cross, hook. You really have to get out of your own way and realize that as soon as you put a weapon in your hand, you don't have to change anything else. I'm doing a jab, cross, hook. Well, now I have a weapon in my hand and I'm doing that same jab, cross, hook. And I'm able to fully utilize that improvised weapon without changing those tactics up. So if all you've ever done is boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, JKD, something else that's considered empty hand, you don't change your tactics. You put a weapon in that hand and you just go to work and you do what you know how to do. And you're able to fully utilize that when you really need it. The next thing that I want to talk about is improvised weapons that you're most likely going to be carrying around on you. Obviously, you can pick up a stick. You might not be able to, especially depending on where you live. You also may not be walking around with a pocket full of pens. You may not be in high school, and so therefore you don't have them. You may not have a drink on you. You may not have these other things on you. But I guarantee you, two things that you're going to have on you is going to be your cell phone and it's going to be your car keys. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is car keys, because for the longest time, people have talked about using car keys as a weapon, and they have done it in the most absolute wrong way. And people that don't know any better, they end up falling for this, and it's not really a good thing. And if you've been in the martial arts industry for more than 5 years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all seen that guy who tells people that if you're gonna punch somebody, you put keys in your hand between your fingers and you punch like that. When you put keys in your hands like this and you go to strike any type of hard target, for example, another human body, what is very likely to happen is either that key is going to go back or the key is going to tweak in and you're going to end up hurting yourself more than you're going to hurt this other person. Which is why I started this whole thing off about talking about grips, because the same thing applies to a key, to a cell phone. When you have a key, you can hold it one of two ways. I can hold it in that forward grip where I have the key in my hand like so. I'm going to put my thumb on the back part of it, and then I'm going to use this as my weapon. I can use tactics such as jabbing. So if I'm here and I go to jab somebody in the eye, I'm actually going to lead with the metal part of the key, and I'm using that to go to the eyes. If I'm going to go in on somebody, I can go in with a slash. Now again, it's not a really big weapon, but it is metal against flesh. And most of the time when it's metal against flesh, metal tends to win. That's also why we went over the reverse grip. The reverse grip fits here just as well. Again, I'm going to place the key in my hand like so. I'm going to put my thumb on the top of it. That way I give it a little bit more structure, so when I do start hitting things, it doesn't fly out of my hand. So I'm going to put that thumb over the top of it, and I'm going to make a fist right on top of that. And I'm going to move this weapon just like I would normally. I can go for the jab. I can go for the slash and the thrust. Again, if you've never trained the weapons-based system and you don't know the slash and the thrust, doesn't mean that you can't do the same thing. I can still do the jab, cross, and I can come across with a hook. If I have that in the forward grip, I can do the same thing. I can go jab, cross, and then I can come in for the hook. A lot of self-defense based systems have the emphasis on a hammer fist type of an attack, and this is perfect for improvised weapons. This is perfect for your keys. If you're doing Krav, you have the hammer fist with the different angles. If you're doing Defense Lab, you have the hammer fist on the different angles. You can even put this into the shapes. Again, I'm going into that shape 1, and from here I'm fully able to utilize that. I'm going to go into a split shape to make an entry, and I can fully utilize that hammer fist type motion with the keys in my hand. Now, one of the things that I do want you to kind of keep your mind on whenever you're utilizing keys for improvised weapons is that it really does depend on where you hit somebody. And what I mean by this is I'm not going to come up and try to jam somebody in the chest with a key, because it's not going to do anything but piss them off, and I don't need that. I'm going to be going to some soft target areas like the eyes, the throat. If you're already making a movement towards me, I may be going for your hands. Believe it or not, if I'm going to grab you and you hit me right in the top of the hand with the key, it's gonna hurt really bad, and I'm gonna think twice before I reach that hand back out. If I'm making the initiative to move in, a lot of times, depending on what system you're doing that, you may be moving in with a hand technique. You may be coming in with that hammer fist, and I'm gonna use that hammer fist and go towards that front barrier so I can destroy it and get in and do whatever else that I need to do. But again, I don't want to hit these hard target areas where if I hit you, it's not going to do anything but cause me more damage. So this is something to think about. Now, real quick, before we move any farther, I do want to kind of put a disclaimer out there. We are talking about soft target areas, and we are talking about causing harm on another human body, but we are only doing so in the realm of self-defense. If you're doing this kind of stuff to go out and attack people, and really you're being the bully, you're being the bad guy, I really hope somebody beats the shit out of you, because that's not what we're talking about here. The idea should not be to go off and hurt somebody else just to be able to do it. The idea is learning how to take care of ourselves so we're able to go back on with our life and back home to the people that we love. So again, this is for self-defense purposes only. And not everybody has an actual car key anymore. A lot of times they have the key fob. Now, the same type of movements you can do with the key, you can do with the key fob. Just keep in mind that there's not any metal here. Now, granted, I have other keys on my keychain, but you may not, right? In my professional opinion, it would make a little bit more sense to kind of use this as a blunt type object. And I'm probably not going to do that with a forward grip, just because I don't have the leverage and I don't have the structure for the weapon in my hand. But if I use it in that reverse grip, in that hammer fist grip, I can use it as a blunt type object, and I can still attack these soft target areas. Again, keep in mind, it's not metal, it's not gonna hurt as much. However, it is still a tool that you can utilize to help keep you safe. Now, going on into cell phones. I don't know if you're starting to see the theme here, right? The theme, one of the themes is that we're talking about weapons that you most likely have on you. Number two, the theme is that when you understand the grips and how to utilize the grips, the tactics are pretty straightforward for most of the weapons. Now, the same thing goes with the cell phone. I can hold it in the forward grip or I can hold it in the reverse grip, and the tactics themselves don't change. So when I have that forward grip, again, I want to make sure that I have a good solid grip, and then I can use it however I deem necessary. I can do the same with the reverse grip, again, taking the thumb to the top so I have that structure, and I can do the same thing. Keep in mind, it's probably gonna break. However, let's think about it. In the scheme of things, I would much rather have a broken phone than a broken face. So the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to shorter type of improvised weapons is that middle grip. We talked about it at the beginning, and it's important to make the distinction here. Now, what the middle grip does is it allows me to be able to utilize the forward grip and the reverse grip no matter what it is that I'm trying to do. If I have that middle grip and I go in for that punch, that jab, I can hit with the knuckles, but it kind of alleviates the point because I have the weapon. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that hand just a little bit, and then I can utilize that weapon. However, if I'm here, I can bring this back and then I can fully utilize the reverse grip part of it. So all it really does is it just allows me to use essentially both grips at the same time with the same weapon without having to make any kind of adjustments to my hand. So we've talked about how to utilize the improvised weapon inside of the fight. Once you're already hands-on, we're talking about strategies, we're talking about tactics. Now I kind of want to play a little bit with how you disengage or how you distract the other person so you can get away. Now, certain systems, for example, Krav Maga, the first part of improvised weapons that you're going to learn is how to use these to distract your opponent, whether to get in or get out. Now, this could be just as simple as throwing something like your keys over their head, especially when it comes to them threatening you with a weapon or something like that. If you take a pair of keys or something, whatever's in your pocket, and you throw it at them, Ideally, they're trying to get you to throw it over their head. That way, when they look up, you can use that as a way to break in, or you can use that as a way to get out. One of the other things that you can use for this are magazines or papers or something like that, if you have them on you. And the idea, again, is that if I have a magazine, it's a little bit bigger and it makes a little bit more noise, so it's a little bit more distracting. And if I take something like this and throw it over your head, chances are that you're gonna either try to block it from your face or you're gonna look up to see it going over your head. Again, I can use this to get in and cause whatever kind of damage that I need to in the self-defense scenario, or I can use it to get away. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is liquids, and this is going to be a little bit fun and maybe a little bit gross, but bear with me. One of the things that I like to do, if I can kind of feel a situation starting to get out of hand, is I'm going to get something to drink. And I know this seems kind of weird, but bear with me. It could be a drink from a bottle, whether it's a Gatorade or a water or something like that. If I have hot coffee or something like that on me, then that's ideal. Once the situation does start escalating to the point where I know it's gonna get physical, I'm gonna put that drink right in your face. Whether it's a bottle of water and I have the top open and I spray it in your face. I love hot coffee because chances are that might be the fight ender right there. You pour hot coffee in somebody's face, it's gonna be really hard for them to wanna keep fighting. The reason why I said that this has the potential to get kind of gross and to bear with me is because one of the liquids that is often overlooked is spit. Now, I'm not saying that if you're having a heated argument or a debate with somebody that you should just automatically go and spit in their face. But if somebody is coming into my space, if they're getting a little bit close for comfort, and again, I pick up that this could be one of those situations that could get out of hand, I'm going to spit in their face. And the funny thing about this is we have this gut reaction. We have this instinct that as soon as somebody acts like that, they're gonna spit in our face, we're immediately grossed out and we start flinching, we start making movements and all this kind of stuff. Even if you don't fully intend to spit in somebody's face, if you make the sound like you're gonna hawk up a loogie when somebody is that close to you, more times than not, they're gonna flinch. And again, that's what I'm counting on, and you can use this as a way to break in or provide a little bit more distance between you and the aggressor. Another kind of funny story about this, my dad, old school, rough and tumble, cowboy type of character, really amazing guy. When he was in a situation where he thought that a fight may break out, he would light up a cigarette. It may not even have been because he needed a cigarette at that point in time, but it gave him a tool, it gave him something to use. If somebody was coming into his space, he didn't want to wait to get sucker punched. He'd light that cigarette. And if he saw a movement that he didn't like, he would flick that cigarette in their face. And again, he would either use that to close in or he would use that to get back out. Now, this is a really good tactic, and this is kind of what all of this is kind of built around. It's not going to take the person out of the fight per se, but it is going to put you in a situation where you can make your next move with just a little bit more ease. And really, that's what we're kind of going for here. So one of the weapons that I want to bring back in and kind of talk about a little bit is going to be the flashlight. Now, we've talked about this before as far as how to strike with it and how to use it as a blunt force type weapon. But another thing that I want to kind of talk about a little bit is how to use it as a distraction. Now again, you want to be able to secure your grip, but you also want to be able to draw this from wherever you have it. Chances are it's going to be in your pocket. So when you have spare time, you should work on being able to pull this out and being able to utilize it. And one of the things that I like to do whenever it's just me and I'm just dry drilling is I'll pull it out of my pocket, I'll flash it, I'll turn it off, and I'll put it back. And I'll sit there and get a few reps like that. And it makes it almost like muscle memory. So one of the last things that I want to talk about before we wrap this video up is you need to take into consideration legal ramifications. You also need to take into consideration ethical considerations. One of the biggest things, the biggest hindrances to just broad general self-defense is that a lot of times people don't do the research that they need to do to figure out what they're legally allowed to do. Now, some states, it doesn't matter. If you feel threatened and you can provide the proof, the necessary proof to show that you are threatened. When it comes to defending yourself, It's pretty lax, but there are some states where certain weapons aren't allowed. The use of certain things as a weapon aren't allowed, and it automatically makes you the bad guy. So these are some things that you need to take into consideration. What are you legally allowed to do? What can you legally explain? Another part of that I really want to talk about is the use of force. So even if I am using an improvised weapon to help protect my life, there is a certain line that technically you're not allowed to pass before you start turning into the aggressor. And an example is if I'm just using my flashlight and I have utilized it to help protect myself, and now that person is no longer the aggressor, and I can safely get away. If I then make the decision to keep bludgeoning him and keep going, and I put him in the hospital when I didn't necessarily need to, you're going to jail. That is what's going to happen. You're going to have to pay a lot of money in legal fees. You're going to have to pay a lot of money in civil fees. And let's just face it, I mean, nobody wants to spend a whole long time in prison when you didn't really have to begin with. So you have to know that when it's time to stop, it's time to stop. However, the flip side of that is sometimes in order to get the upper hand, somebody will fake being beaten down, and then they'll show that they want to quit and all this kind of stuff. And the second that you let up, they use that as a way to get in and cause the damage that they wanted to begin with. So you have to be careful with this, and this is where training kind of comes into key. You learn how to disable somebody, and I don't mean disable like breaking legs. I mean putting them in a position where they are no longer willing or able to attack you, and then you get away. But you also learn that how to follow up if you need to. So take this into consideration. Now, one of the other things that I want you to think about is the ethical considerations. When you're training self-defense, when you're training these fighting systems, you're learning how to cause harm on another human body. And not everybody is fully cognizant of this fact. Not everybody is fully aware what it takes to hurt somebody, to put somebody down to the point where they're not able to get back up again. So a couple of questions that you have to ask yourself: what are you willing to do to somebody else? Are you willing to take their life with a weapon? Are you willing to stick your thumb all the way in somebody's eye? Are you willing to kill somebody's husband, somebody's brother, somebody's son? Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh man, if they attack me, I see red and I just black out. And everybody in this industry knows that's bullshit. If you've been training for a certain amount of time, you probably have a good idea of what it is that you can do and what it is that you can't do to hurt somebody. Hurting somebody takes a certain type of mentality. And what you really have to ask yourself is, are you full, willing, and able? Are you going to take somebody's life if you absolutely have to? If your children's life depend on it? If your wife, your girlfriend, your husband, if their lives depend on it? What are you going to be able to do if you're confronted with this situation where you have to do it? I hope this video has kind of given you a little bit more information when it comes to improvised weapons. And really, I want to reiterate that you don't have to go change your system. You don't have to go change your style. You don't have to go seek out specified types of training to be able to utilize improvised weapons. If you're already training something, whether it's a self-defense system like Krav Maga, or if it's a fighting system like Defense Lab, or Muay Thai, or something along these lines, you're already training these tactics. All you really have to do is kind of break your mind out of that box just a little bit and realize that the movements you've already been making 100 times over, all you have to do is put a weapon in that hand and then you're able to go. Now, there are certain weapons that are a little bit more specialized, and what I mean by that is you have things that are like belts, or you have more fabric type weapons that you can use like towels and stuff like that. When it comes to these specialized weapons, I would say that it's not a bad idea to search out somebody who specializes in this. Filipino Martial Arts, they have the sarong. If you're wanting to learn how to use a long blade, I would go and find somebody who's very proficient. Another really interesting thing to think about, and this is one of the guy that I'm going to mention, this is one of the reasons why I have so much respect for him. Tim Kennedy, he runs a program called Sheepdog Response. And in this, if you watch any of the videos or you do any kind of research into this, you see that they do a lot of empty hand and hand-to-hand type fight training. And one of the things that they do is that they'll put these people into a grappling type scenario, whether it's jiu-jitsu, wrestling, or whatever. They put them in this grappling type scenario, and then they introduce weapons. And this is almost right off the bat. And I love this because grappling is really great. Grappling with that sense of reality of like, oh my God, this guy has a knife, or this guy has some other kind of weapon, and now I have to control the weapon, and now I have to get the weapon, and now I have the weapon, what do I do? And putting yourself in those types of scenarios, I think, is absolutely amazing for any type of weapons training, but especially with improvised type weapons. And you want to kind of dabble a little bit in weapon specific systems, go check out some of our other videos. We have a lot of them on there where we're talking about really simplified ways of how to use these different types of weapons. So before you go, I do want to ask, if you have the chance, go into the comments section and let us know what your favorite improvised weapon is, whether it's keys, whether it's whatever. The only thing that I ask is don't be that guy. We all know that guy. Don't be him, where you get on there and say, well, I wouldn't do any of that because I have a gun. First of all, if you say that, we already know you can't fight. So just don't do it. And second of all, we're not talking about guns. We're talking about improvised weapons. Get on there. Tell us what your favorite improvised weapon is. We would love to hear from you.